It is that one, yeah.
Alright guys, my name is Sneha. Thank you guys for having me. A little bit about myself. I'm a board certified behavior analyst, BCBA. Has anyone heard of that before? Does anyone know what BCBA is? One person. Cool, so I can totally BS you guys and you have no idea. So a little bit about myself. I worked for about 3 years with kids who have autism, ages 3 to 22. And last year I started my own company, Spectrum Success, working with adults on the spectrum because after the age of 22, there's not much funding for services for those individuals. So you have a group of highly talented people who are not able to get jobs simply because usually of their social skills. So let's go over the diagnostic criteria a little bit, and then we'll get into some of my experiences working with the population. So, persistent deficits in social communication and social interactions across multiple contexts. What does that look like? It can look like failure of normal back and forth conversation, reduced sharing of interests or emotions, affects, not being able to read nonverbal body language, not being able to communicate properly, not understanding sarcasm. And as you can imagine, when you have deficits in those two areas, that's going to lead to developing deficits in relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, with your teachers, with your peers. And then we have the second requirement here, which is restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, and activities. So stereotyped or repetitive motor movements. An example would be hand flapping. I'm not sure if you guys have seen someone do that before. Obviously, I worked with a client, and I went home and I tried it, and I was like, oh, that feels pretty good, actually. Like, it's a good stretching thing. But if someone's going like this for an hour, it becomes extremely disruptive in their life, right? You can't drive to the grocery store, you can't get your homework done because you're sitting there engaging in this activity. Another thing is scripting. Has anyone heard of scripting? So scripting means maybe they have a favorite movie or commercial or even theme song or something like that, and they keep repeating that over and over again. I've had clients who have entire movies memorized, entire movie script, that's scripting. So an important thing to note, though, is that these impairments must be clinically significant. So if I go to a party and I'm talking about the Lakers, the entire party, that doesn't mean that just because I'm obsessed with the Lakers, that doesn't mean that I have autism. Right? The next day, if I go into a job interview and I'm still just talking about the Lakers, maybe that there's something to look into. But it needs to cause impairments in your relationship, in your functioning at work or at school, in order to be considered a disorder. Another thing is these signs must be there in early development. So you might not be diagnosed until later on in life when, like your teacher was talking about, you're presented with new challenges like going to college and stuff like that. Your symptoms might become more prevalent, but they must be noted in early childhood. All right, but what is autism? How many of you guys watched The Big Bang Theory? So Sheldon on The Big Bang Theory has not properly been diagnosed on the show, but in my opinion, he shows a lot of characteristics of Asperger's syndrome, which is which is on the high functioning end of the spectrum, right? So let's talk about some Sheldon quotes here to demonstrate what autism looks like. Let's see. I'm quite aware of the way humans usually reproduce, which is messy, unsanitary, and involves loud and unnecessary appeals to a deity. I don't know about you guys, but that's not how I would describe sex, right? To him, it's something that must be done to have a baby. It's gross, it's unsanitary, it's messy, it's not logical. A lot of people with autism don't like to be touched. So not just sex, right, but shaking your hand, getting a hug, they feel very uncomfortable with that. Let's choose one more. Let's choose this one. I can't be impossible. I exist. I believe what you meant to say is, I give up. He's improbable. So individuals on the spectrum tend to take things very literally, right? So you and I would understand when I'm saying, oh, you're impossible, that means you're being really annoying, stop, or something like that, right? But to him, he's like, you're stupid, I'm right here, I'm not impossible, I'm just improbable. That would be the correct terminology, right? Another example that I've come across in the workplace is if a boss tells you the customer is always right, that just means you treat the customer as though he's always right? Show them the respect and give them good service. But to someone with autism, they might literally think that the customer is always right. And that's your own fault for telling them that. So when they're coming to you after talking to the customer saying, why are we selling shitty products? But look, this is a typical family and what they have to deal with on a regular basis. So Mom made this diagram. G stands for her child who has autism. And look at all these things that they have to deal with on a regular basis. It's important to keep in mind that not just one person is affected by this situation, right? This diagnosis is affecting the entire family. A sibling is probably going to get a lot less attention from parents, not because the parents love him or her any less, but because their attention towards the child who needs more support, right? Then it also takes a huge toll on a marriage, dealing with all of these things, right? And then you have the different types of therapists. You have special ed director, physical therapy, occupational therapy, ABA therapy, speech therapy, after-school therapy, in-school therapy. It's exhausting. And there are all these things that people have to deal with on a regular basis. Okay, ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis. So a lot of people these days associate ABA with autism, but that's not necessarily true, right? We do primarily use ABA therapy with individuals who have autism, but you can use ABA for a ton of other stuff too. You can use it as a teacher, you can use it, like I just rewarded someone for answering a question, right? That's a simple technique of ABA. You're rewarding the behavior that you want to see increased. I use it on my husband all the time. You can use it at an HR department for training employees, making sure that they're motivated and finishing their tasks and everything like that. So when people say apply, so here's a formal definition, but if there's one thing you take away from it today, let it be this. So ABA is all about increasing the positive behaviors and replacing the maladaptive behaviors. So a lot of people think that you're trying to stop a behavior, but that's not true. Once your behavior is in your repertoire, you've learned it and it's with you. You can't just get rid of it, but you can replace it with a more appropriate behavior. So what do I mean by that? Let's say a kid's running across the street, and this is something that's common with people with autism. They don't have a sense of safety or awareness or danger, right? So you're running across the street, and it's natural to yell, stop. But that's not enough. You need to teach them what the correct, appropriate replacement behavior is, which could be look left, look right, and then cross the street. Or if it's in a specific situation, you're dropping them off at school. Wait until the crosswalk lady with a yellow vest goes to the crosswalk with a stop sign, then you can cross the street. Alright, so there are 4 functions of behavior, which means that all of your behavior is motivated by these 4 things. Access to attention, access to a tangible, escaping or avoiding a situation, and sensory stimulation. So for the first 3, typically, what you want to do is figure out the function of the behavior, and I'll go over that in a minute, how you figure out the function of behavior. And then, once you figure out the function of the behavior, you can replace the behavior, the maladaptive behavior, with something more appropriate. And then there's sensory stimulation, which is a bit more difficult to replace, because if you're doing like hand flopping and it feels good, what can you replace hand flopping with, right? Something else that feels good. So usually what you do is you teach them the correct time and place that you can engage in that behavior. So maybe set a timer, and if you're at home after school, you can sit there and hand flop for 5 minutes. If you do that for an hour, though, you're going to hurt your wrist, right? What's another behavior that feels good and you can't do in public? Come on, you guys are all going to do it. Just say it. Someone just say it. Masturbation, right? So, I mean, yeah, it might be uncomfortable to talk about, but it's going to come up as a clinician. When you're working with middle school, high school age kids, right? And let's say they're more severely affected with autism, so they're at the lower end of the spectrum, all they're going to understand is, hey, this feels good, and I'm going to want to do it whenever I feel like doing it, right? So I had a client who would start engaging in masturbation in the classroom. And his dad said, can you just throw a blanket over him and let him finish? No. How many things are wrong with that, right? So the first step was to teach him that when he felt like engaging in that activity, go to the bathroom at school, right? But as a clinician, you have to think long term. It's not enough to just get them to the bathroom, because what if they're at a restaurant with their family or friends, and they're like, hey, okay, at school, when I'm going to do this, I have to go to the bathroom, so let me go to the bathroom over here. But now you're in a public bathroom, and unfortunately, there are a lot of creepers out there who will take advantage of someone in a vulnerable situation in the bathroom. So now you just put your client in danger of being sexually violated in a public bathroom, right? So you have to think of your end goal and your objectives to getting to that end goal. So in this case, right, the first objective was get him out of the classroom into a bathroom. The second objective becomes teach him to wait until he gets home. And the third objective becomes teach him an appropriate place in his home, in the privacy of his room or bathroom or whatever. Does that make sense? Yeah? All right. Does anyone have any, if you're comfortable sharing, how many of you know someone who has autism? Quite a few of you. Does anyone feel comfortable sharing an experience or situation that you've had? No? Okay. No worries. So I also want to point out that the same behavior in different people can have different functions. So you have a crying, screaming kid. For one kid, that might be, or let's say you're taking a final exam in class right now, okay? And you have two people who start screaming. So the first time someone screams, everyone starts laughing. What was the function of the behavior there?
It's funny.
It's funny, right? He's getting attention. Everyone's laughing. Then you have another person who starts screaming, and the teacher's like, that's it, you're out. What was the function there? You're avoiding the test, right? You might fail class, but you avoided taking the test. Does that make sense? Right? And so once you identify the function, you can create a proper support plan and decide what type of behavior will replace it. Because you need to find a replacement behavior that serves the same function. So that will be different for everyone. How do you figure out the function of the behavior? Has anyone heard of ABC data before? So ABC data is, the A stands for antecedent, so that's what happened right before the behavior. The B stands for the behavior, obviously, and the consequence is what happened right after the behavior. And you need to collect data at least 15, 20 times on the same behavior to determine what the function is. And that's why I love ABA, is because it's a science. All you're doing is you're collecting the data and let the data speak for itself. And then you analyze the data and figure out the correct intervention. So let's use an example. Let's say the antecedent is kids watching TV and dad turns the TV off. The behavior becomes kid starts crying, and then dad's like, okay, 10 more minutes, and puts the TV back on. What was the function there? Anyone? To avoid what? So that's the function of the dad's behavior, but what's the function of the kid's behavior? Access to tangible, exactly, to the TV show, right? Now let's say the same situation, and antecedent, dad turns the TV off, kid starts crying, and mom's like, oh, don't cry. What was the function there? What? Attention, that's right. So it's important to collect the data several times on the same behavior, so you can see, like 8 times out of 10, what is the function? Because it can be different, and you can have multiple functions too. Okay, so now I need one brave volunteer.